Jackson's hands trembled as he stared at the termination letter on the polished mahogany desk. The signature at the bottom made his blood run cold. Michelle Alumide, Chief Executive Officer. His wife. The woman he had humiliated. The woman whose quiet strength he had mistaken for weakness. The woman he had allowed another woman to slap in front of their children, in front of teachers, in front of the entire school community. And now, as he stood in this empty boardroom with security waiting to escort him out, the devastating truth crashed over him like a tsunami. Michelle wasn't just his wife. She was his boss. She had always been his boss. The company, the house, the life he thought he had built, it was all hers. Every single piece of it. And he had destroyed it all for a woman who was already moving on to her next victim. Before we continue, let me ask you something quietly. Where are you listening from right now? And what time is it in your part of the world? Some of us are hearing this story under the hot afternoon sun. Some in the calm of the night, when thoughts are heavy and hearts are open. Different places, one story, one lesson. If stories like this speak to your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your like helps this story reach another soul. Your comment tells me you understand the lesson. And when you share, you may be saving someone from the same mistake. Now let us continue. Jackson adjusted his tie in the bathroom mirror, admiring his reflection with the kind of satisfaction that comes from a man who believes he has conquered the world. At 38, he was the operations manager at Alumide Manufacturing Limited, one of the most respected production companies in Lagos. Good salary, company car, respect from his team. He had worked hard to get here, he told himself. He was the provider, the man of the house. In the bedroom, Michelle sat cross-legged on the bed with her laptop, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed quarterly financial reports. Her hair was wrapped in a simple scarf, her cotton nightgown modest and comfortable. She had been up since 5 in the morning, as she was every day, managing conference calls with international distributors before the children woke for school. "You're still working?" Jackson asked, barely glancing at her as he grabbed his briefcase. "What freelance consulting project is keeping you up this time?" Michelle looked up and smiled softly. "Just reviewing some contracts. Will you be home for dinner? Zara has a recital practice she wants to show you." "I'll try. Big meeting today with the new sales team. We're expanding the coastal distribution network." He said it with pride, as if he had conceived the idea himself. He didn't know that Michelle had drafted the expansion proposal 3 months ago, that she had approved every hiring decision, that the big meeting was implementing her vision. "That sounds important," Michelle said gently. "Drive safely." Jackson left without kissing her goodbye. It had been months since he'd done that. Michelle returned to her laptop, her expression unchanged. But her fingers paused over the keyboard as she opened another file. A folder titled Evidence. Inside were screenshots of hotel bookings charged to the company card Jackson didn't realize she monitored. Romantic text messages recovered from cloud backups. Expense reports for jewelry she had never received. And dozens of photographs showing Jackson with Simone, the flashy sales executive with long Brazilian weave and designer bags that screamed for attention. Michelle had known for 7 months. She had said nothing, done nothing, shown nothing. She simply watched, documented, and waited. Because Michelle had learned from her late father, the man who had built Alumide Manufacturing from a single warehouse into an empire. Never react in anger. React with strategy. Let foolish people reveal themselves completely before you make your move. At the breakfast table, 10-year-old Zara pushed her plantain around her plate. "Mama, why doesn't Daddy smile at you anymore?" Michelle's heart clenched, but her face remained calm. "Adults sometimes go through difficult phases, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anything has changed about how much we love you and Ethan." 7-year-old Ethan looked up from his cereal. "Samuel's parents divorced. His daddy doesn't live with them anymore. Are you and Daddy going to divorce?" "Eat your breakfast, my loves," Michelle said softly, reaching over to squeeze Ethan's hand. "You'll be late for school." But in her mind, she had already made her decision. The question wasn't if anymore. It was when. That evening, Jackson came home at 10:30, reeking of expensive perfume that wasn't Michelle's subtle rose scent. His shirt collar bore the faint trace of lipstick in a shade of burgundy Michelle had never worn. Traffic was terrible. he muttered, heading straight for the shower. Michelle sat in the living room, her tablet on her lap, watching the security footage from the hotel parking lot, where Jackson's car had been parked from 6 to 9:30. She watched him and Simone enter together, laughing. She watched them leave separately, Simone checking her makeup in her phone camera, Jackson adjusting his clothes. She closed the tablet and went to their bedroom. Jackson was already in bed, his back turned to her. "Good night, Jackson," she whispered into the darkness. He didn't respond. Michelle lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of her children's questions at breakfast, thinking of the business her father had entrusted to her on his deathbed, thinking of the 12 years she had given to this marriage, the sacrifices, the silent support, the deliberate choice to let Jackson believe he was the star while she operated in the shadows. And she thought of Simone's smirking face in the photographs, the way the other woman looked at her husband with possession, as if Michelle didn't exist. "Let him reveal himself fully," she whispered to herself, her father's voice echoing in her memory. "Patience is the weapon of the wise." But patience was running out. Simone was not a patient woman. She wanted what she wanted, and she wanted it loudly, publicly, and immediately. "I'm tired of hiding," she told Jackson as they sat in her apartment 3 weeks later. She traced a red fingernail down his chest, her voice taking on a whining edge. "When are you going to tell her about us? When are you going to move out and be with me properly?" Jackson shifted uncomfortably. "It's complicated. There are the children to consider. The house. Finances. Finances." Simone laughed sharply. "Baby, you're an operations manager at one of the biggest companies in Lagos. You make good money. You can afford to take care of me and still support your kids. Unless..." She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "Unless you're lying about how much you earn." No, nothing like that," Jackson said quickly. "I just need to time it right. Michelle is... she's emotional. She might make things difficult." Simone stood up, grabbing her designer handbag, purchased with money Jackson had embezzled from his department's petty cash, money Michelle had already noticed and documented. "If you really loved me, you'd prove it. You'd show her who matters now. You'd show everyone." Jackson felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "What do you mean, show everyone?" "Introduce me to your family. Bring me to events. Let people see us together." Simone smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Let's see how confident she is when she realizes she's already been replaced. Against every instinct screaming at him to stop, Jackson agreed. The following Sunday, Mama Eunice hosted her monthly family dinner at her spacious home in Ikeja. The entire extended family gathered. Aunties, uncles, cousins, in-laws. Michelle came with Zara and Ethan, carrying the jollof rice and plantain she had prepared that morning. Then Jackson arrived with Simone. The room went silent. Mama Eunice's wooden spoon froze mid-stir in the pot of egusi soup. Michelle's younger brother Kenneth stopped mid-laugh, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Everyone, this is Simone," Jackson announced with forced casualness. "She's a colleague from work. I told her about our family dinners, and she was interested in experiencing authentic home cooking." Simone smiled widely, her tight red dress and 6-inch heels absurdly out of place in the comfortable family setting. "Thank you so much for having me. Jackson has told me so much about his family." Michelle stood near the dining table, her hands steady as she arranged serving dishes. She looked up briefly, made direct eye contact with Simone, then returned to her task without a word. "Jackson," Mama Eunice said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of profound disappointment. "May I speak with you in the kitchen?" "Not now, Mama. Let's eat first." Throughout dinner, Simone made herself the center of attention. She laughed loudly at jokes that weren't funny, touched Jackson's arm constantly, and made pointed comments about modern women and traditional wives that everyone understood were aimed at Michelle. When Michelle rose to get more water, Simone deliberately sat in her usual chair beside Jackson. Zara's eyes filled with tears. "That's Mama's seat." "Well, maybe it's time for some changes around here," Simone said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Kenneth stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Michelle, let's take the children outside for some air." But Michelle shook her head gently. "It's fine, Kenneth. Sit. Eat." Jackson watched his wife with growing confusion. Why wasn't she angry? Why wasn't she crying or yelling? Her calmness unnerved him more than any argument would have. After dinner, as families filtered out to the compound, Mama Eunice pulled Michelle aside. "My daughter, I see what is happening. You don't have to tolerate this disrespect in front of your children." Michelle smiled sadly. "Mama, I learned from my father to let people show the world exactly who they are. I don't need to say a word. The truth will speak for itself. But your children. My children will learn that dignity doesn't require a raised voice," Michelle said firmly. "And they will learn what kind of man their father truly is. That lesson, as painful as it will be, is necessary." Over the following weeks, Jackson grew bolder. He stopped hiding his affair entirely. He stayed out multiple nights a week, his excuses growing thinner and more insulting. Client meeting in Abuja. Team building in Ibadan. Conference in Port Harcourt. Michelle knew he was at Simone's apartment. She had the addresses, the dates, the timestamps. Her lawyer already had copies of everything. Simone, meanwhile, pushed further. She began calling Jackson's phone during family dinners, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear through the speaker. She sent him gifts at the office with cards signed, "You're forever." She posted cryptic messages on social media about finally finding real love and queens who know their worth. "Jackson," Michelle said one evening as he packed yet another overnight bag. "Zara has her school cultural day next Saturday. She's performing a traditional dance. She wants both of us there." "I'll try to make it," Jackson said dismissively. "She's 10 years old. She needs her father. And I need you to stop being so needy," Jackson snapped. "I have responsibilities. Work doesn't stop just because there's some school event." Michelle's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Jackson left and Michelle sat in the empty living room, staring at her wedding photo on the wall. The young couple smiling back at her seemed like strangers now, people who had believed in forever, in partnership, in love. She picked up her phone and sent a single message to Kenneth. "It's almost time." Kenneth replied immediately. "Are you sure you're ready?" Michelle typed slowly. "I've been ready. I'm just letting him dig deep enough that he can never climb back out." On Friday night, Jackson called. "I'm bringing a work friend to Zara's cultural day tomorrow. Simone wants to see what these school events are like. She's thinking about her future kids." Michelle closed her eyes, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Michelle? Did you hear me?" "I heard you, Jackson," she said softly. "Bring whoever you want." She hung up and looked at her children's bedroom door, where Zara and Ethan slept peacefully, unaware that their world was about to shatter. "Forgive me, my babies," she whispered, "but you need to see who he really is. So you'll understand why Mama had to let him go." The sun blazed overhead as parents, teachers, and students gathered in the courtyard of Heritage International School. Colorful decorations adorned the compound, banners celebrating African cultural heritage, stages set up for performances, food stalls selling puff-puff and chin-chin. Children ran between adults in traditional attire, their excitement electric in the air. Michelle sat in the parent section wearing a beautiful Ankara dress in royal blue, her hair wrapped elegantly. She held Ethan's hand as they watched Zara prepare backstage for her dance performance. Other parents greeted her warmly. Michelle was known at the school for her generous donations to the library and arts program, donations made anonymously that only the principal knew came from her. Then Jackson arrived. With Simone. Simone wore a tight leopard print dress cut low at the chest and high at the thigh, completely inappropriate for a children's school event. Her weave was freshly done, cascading down her back. Her heels clicked loudly on the concrete as she clung to Jackson's arm like a prize she had won. Conversations stopped. Parents stared. Teachers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Jackson walked directly to where Michelle sat, Simone attached to his side. "We made it." Traffic from the island was terrible. Ethan looked up at the strange woman holding his father's arm. "Daddy, who is she?" "A friend from work, buddy," Jackson said, not meeting his son's eyes. Michelle said nothing. She simply watched, her face a mask of calm that belied the storm building inside her chest. Simone looked around with exaggerated interest. "What a quaint school. Very traditional." The word dripped with condescension. "It's one of the best schools in Lagos," said Mrs. Adebayo, the parent seated next to Michelle. Our children are blessed to attend here. Oh, I'm sure, Simone said with a dismissive smile. She turned to Jackson. Baby, can we get closer to the stage? I want good pictures. Baby. She had called him baby. In front of his wife. In front of his son. Michelle's hand tightened around Ethan's, but her expression didn't change. They found seats near the front just as the performances began. Zara appeared on stage in a beautiful Yoruba iro and buba, her young face serious with concentration, as she and 5 other girls began the traditional bata dance their teacher had choreographed. Michelle's heart swelled with pride. Her daughter moved gracefully, confidently, beautifully. The performance ended to thunderous applause. Zara's face lit up as she scanned the crowd for her parents. When she spotted them, she ran down from the stage, her little legs carrying her straight to her mother. Mama! Did you see? Did I do good? Michelle pulled her daughter into her arms, tears streaming down her face. You were perfect, my love. Absolutely perfect. Zara turned to Jackson. Daddy, did you like it? It was great, princess, Jackson said, but his attention was on his phone. Simone looked Zara up and down with barely concealed contempt. Cute little dance. Very simple. Then, loud enough for people nearby to hear, she added. Poor thing doesn't even know her mother's being replaced soon. The words hung in the air like poison. Michelle slowly stood, still holding Zara's hand. She turned to face Simone directly, her voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly silent space. My children will never be discussed by you again. Simone's eyes flashed with rage. In that moment, emboldened by weeks of Jackson's cowardice, fueled by her own narcissistic delusion that she had won, she did the unthinkable. She slapped Michelle across the face. The crack of palm against cheek echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. Zara screamed. Ethan started crying. Parents gasped. Teachers moved forward in shock. Michelle's head had snapped to the side from the force. A red handprint bloomed on her brown cheek. For a moment she stood perfectly still, her hand rising slowly to touch the burning skin. Then she turned her eyes to Jackson. He stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The compound had gone completely silent. Every eye was on him, waiting to see what kind of man he truly was. And Jackson laughed. It was a nervous, uncertain laugh, but it was a laugh nonetheless. Michelle, come on. Don't make a scene. You probably said something to provoke her. Just apologize to Simone and let's move on. The words fell like bombs. Michelle looked at her husband, the father of her children, the man she had built a life with, the man she had quietly supported and elevated for 12 years. And in that moment something inside her died. Not her strength, not her dignity, but her love. Whatever remained of it evaporated like morning mist under the brutal afternoon sun. She looked at her sobbing daughter, at her terrified son, at the community of parents and teachers who had witnessed her public humiliation. Michelle touched her burning cheek one more time, then looked at Jackson with something he had never seen in her eyes before. Cold, absolute, terrifying finality. She said nothing. Not one word. She took Zara's hand on one side and Ethan's on the other, and she walked out of that school compound with her head held high, her children crying beside her, and the entire community watching in stunned, horrified silence. Behind her, Simone laughed triumphantly. Finally, someone put that quiet mouse in her place. Jackson stood there, watching his wife disappear through the school gates, and for the first time, a cold finger of fear traced down his spine. Mrs. Adebayo stood and gathered her belongings. You are a disgrace to manhood, Jackson. An absolute disgrace. She walked away, followed by several other parents who refused to remain in his presence. Jackson's phone buzzed. A message from Kenneth. You just destroyed your life. I hope she was worth it. When Jackson arrived home that evening, the house was dark. The gate code didn't work. His key didn't fit the lock. On the porch sat 3 suitcases and 4 cardboard boxes containing all his belongings. On top of the boxes was a single envelope. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a termination letter from Alumide Manufacturing Limited and a notice of divorce proceedings, both signed by Michelle Alumide, Chief Executive Officer. The world tilted beneath his feet as the truth finally devastatingly crashed down on him. Monday morning arrived with the cruel indifference of a new week that cared nothing for shattered lives. Jackson stood outside the gates of Undone Manufacturing Limited at 6:30 in the morning, his access card in hand, his company ID hanging around his neck, telling himself there had been some terrible mistake. He swiped his card at the entrance. The light blinked red. Access denied. He tried again. Red. Again. Red. "Sir, please step aside," the security guard said, his voice professional but cold. "You no longer have authorization to enter this facility." "What? That's impossible. I'm the operations manager. There must be an error in the system." "No error, sir." The guard handed him a sealed envelope. "I was instructed to give you this if you arrived." Jackson tore it open with shaking hands. The letterhead made his vision blur. Undone Manufacturing Limited. Executive Office of the CEO. Mr. Jackson Okafor. This letter serves as formal notice of the immediate termination of your employment with Undone Manufacturing Limited, effective Saturday, November 18, 2024. Your termination is based on the following grounds. 1. Misuse of company funds and resources for personal purposes. 2. Fraudulent expense reporting. 3. Violation of workplace harassment policies. 4. Conduct unbecoming of company values and leadership standards. Your final paycheck, minus deductions for misappropriated funds, will be processed according to labor law requirements. Your company vehicle must be returned within 48 hours. All company property, including laptop, phone, and access credentials, must be surrendered to Human Resources. This decision is final and non-negotiable. Signed, Michelle Undone, Chief Executive Officer. Jackson read it 3 times, each reading making less sense than the last. Michelle Undone, Chief Executive Officer. "No," he whispered. No. This is a mistake. Michelle is my wife. She doesn't work here. She does freelance consulting from home. Mr. Okafor, I need you to leave the premises now, or I will call additional security," the guard said firmly. Jackson stumbled backward, his mind fracturing. He pulled out his phone and dialed the Human Resources Department. After being transferred twice, he finally reached the HR director, Mrs. Okonkwo. "Mrs. Okonkwo, there's been a terrible mistake. I received a termination letter signed by someone claiming to be the CEO, but..." "Mr. Okafor," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "There is no mistake. Mrs. Michelle Undone is indeed our Chief Executive Officer and majority shareholder. She has been since her father, Chief Emmanuel Undone, passed away 8 years ago. She founded this company alongside him 20 years ago, long before you were employed here." The phone nearly slipped from Jackson's grip. That's impossible. I would have known. She would have told me." Mrs. Undone preferred to operate behind the scenes, allowing the COO and department heads to manage day-to-day operations while she handled strategy, investments, and major decisions from her home office. She's one of the most brilliant business minds in Nigerian manufacturing. Frankly, Mr. Okafor, you should have asked more questions about your wife's work before assuming she was just a housewife. Jackson's legs gave out. He sank to the ground outside the company gates, his mind reeling through years of memories now recontextualized. The freelance consulting, the late-night video calls, the way management always seemed to approve his proposals so easily, his promotions, his salary increases, the company car, the bonuses, all of it. "Michelle, the company card I use for business expenses," he said weakly. "The one for client dinners and travel. That card was assigned to you through Mrs. Onyemede's authorization," Mrs. Okonkwo said coldly. She personally reviewed every transaction, including the hotel bookings with Miss Simone Ease, including the jewelry purchases that never made it to your wife, including the romantic dinners charged as client entertainment. Mrs. Onyemade documented everything, Mr. Okafor. Everything. "Simone," Jackson breathed. "What about Simone?" Miss Ease was also terminated on Saturday for workplace misconduct, harassment, and violation of professional ethics. Her behavior at a company family member's school event was the final straw, though there were already multiple complaints from other staff about her inappropriate conduct. The line went dead. Jackson sat on the curb outside the company he had thought he helped build, staring at nothing. People passing by recognized him and whispered, some pointing, some shaking their heads in disgust. The video of Simone slapping Michelle had already gone viral on social media. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen. His phone rang. Mama Eunice. Mama, you let that woman put her hands on your wife, his mother said, her voice shaking with rage and grief. In front of your children. In front of teachers and parents and the entire community. You laughed, Jackson. You laughed. Mama, I didn't know. You didn't know that Michelle was a human being deserving of respect? You didn't know that your children were watching? What exactly didn't you know, Jackson? I didn't know she owned the company. I didn't know she was the CEO. She never told me. And why should she have? Mama Eunice's voice turned to ice. So you could feel entitled to her money? So you could claim her accomplishments as your own? Michelle never needed to announce her power. Because true power doesn't require announcements. But you are not a man. You are a disgrace. Don't call me again until you can look at yourself in the mirror without vomiting from shame. She hung up. Over the next 2 days, Jackson's entire world collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. His church small group removed him. His friends stopped answering calls. Kenneth showed up at the apartment Jackson had rented with money. He didn't have to collect the children's belongings. His face a mask of contempt. How are they? Jackson asked desperately. Please let me see them. Zara is in therapy, Kenneth said flatly. She has nightmares every night. She wakes up screaming, reliving that moment when she watched her father's mistress slap her mother and heard her father laugh. Ethan won't speak to anyone. He just sits in his room drawing pictures of your old house with the 3 of you in it, and then he scribbles black crayon over your face until the paper tears. Jackson's knees buckled. Kenneth, please. Michelle's lawyer filed for divorce. She's seeking full custody. Given the documented evidence of your infidelity, financial misconduct, and the psychological trauma inflicted on the children, no judge in Nigeria will deny her request. Kenneth stepped closer, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. You didn't just cheat on your wife, Jackson. You humiliated the woman who built everything you have. You disrespected the mother of your children in front of them. You chose a woman who slapped her over your own family. There is no coming back from this. None. Kenneth left and Jackson sank to the floor of his tiny, empty apartment, the weight of his actions finally fully crushing him. He tried to reach Simone. Her number was disconnected. He went to her apartment. She had moved out, neighbors said, went back to Enugu with her new boyfriend. Jackson sat in the dark apartment, staring at his phone, scrolling through old photos of his family. Michelle smiling at their wedding. Zara as a newborn in his arms. Ethan's first birthday party. Happier times when he had everything and didn't know it. His lawyer's assessment was brutal. Mr. Okafor, you have no case. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Mrs. Alyamide has documentation of adultery, financial misconduct, and child endangerment through emotional trauma. Your best option is to agree to her terms and hope she shows mercy in the custody arrangement. Mercy. From the woman he had betrayed. From the woman he had allowed to be assaulted while he laughed. Jackson knew there would be no mercy. And he finally understood he didn't deserve any. 6 months passed like 6 years. Jackson sat in the small bedroom of his one-room apartment in a neighborhood far from the life he once knew. The walls were thin enough that he could hear his neighbors' television and arguments. His job as a junior supervisor at a competing manufacturing company paid barely a third of what he used to earn, and even that position had come only because the owner pitied him after hearing his story, though pity and respect were very different things. Every worker at the company knew who he was. The man whose wife owned his former company. The man who had been too blind, too arrogant, too stupid to realize the quiet woman he had dismissed was actually a business titan. They treated him with the bare minimum of professional courtesy, but he could see the judgment in their eyes. In his old life, people had sought his opinion, laughed at his jokes, made way for him in meetings. Now he was invisible. Worse than invisible. He was a cautionary tale. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Michelle was granted full custody of Zara and Ethan. Jackson was permitted supervised visits twice a month for 2 hours each, supervised by Kenneth or Michelle's cousin Patricia. Not because the court thought he was physically dangerous, but because both children showed severe emotional distress at the prospect of being alone with him. Today was visitation day. Jackson arrived at the family court supervised visitation center at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a bag of gifts he had saved for weeks to buy. A doll for Zara. A remote control car for Ethan. Things that would never make up for what he had done but were all he had to offer. Kenneth was already there with the children. Zara, now 11, had grown taller. Her face had lost some of its childish roundness, replaced by the emerging features of the young woman she would become. She sat rigid in her chair, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. Ethan, 8 years old now, sat beside his sister. He had his mother's eyes, and in them Jackson saw no recognition. No warmth. Nothing. "Hey, my babies," Jackson said, his voice cracking. "I brought you presents." "I thought." "We don't want them," Zara said quietly. Jackson froze. "Princess, Don't call me that." Zara finally looked at him, and the coldness in her young eyes made Jackson's heart shatter. "You don't get to call me that anymore." Kenneth stood by the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Jackson set the gifts down and tried to sit closer. Ethan immediately moved his chair backward, maintaining distance. "How is school?" Jackson asked desperately. "Zara, are you still dancing?" "Ethan, buddy, are you playing football?" Silence. Jackson's hands trembled. "I know I made terrible mistakes. I know I hurt you and your mother. But I'm your father. I love you. Please just talk to me." Zara's jaw tightened. When she spoke, her voice was measured, far too mature for her age. The voice of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. "You let her hit Mama. We were right there. We saw everything." Tears began streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. "That woman slapped our mother in front of everyone. In front of our teachers. In front of our friends. And you laughed. You told Mama to apologize." "I didn't understand." "You understood perfectly," Zara interrupted. "You understood that you cared more about that woman than you cared about us. You understood that Mama's feelings didn't matter to you. You understood that we didn't matter." "That's not true. You matter more than anything in the world." Ethan spoke for the first time, his small voice barely a whisper. "Then why did you leave us?" The question hung in the air like a knife. "I didn't leave you, Mama. The situation. It's complicated." "No, it's not," Zara said. "You chose someone else. You brought her around us. You let her hurt Mama. And when Mama said enough, you blamed her. That's not complicated. That's just wrong." Jackson broke down completely, tears pouring down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I could take it back, if I could undo it all." "But you can't," Zara said simply. "That's what Mama says. Some things can't be undone. Some choices can't be taken back." She stood, taking Ethan's hand. "We don't want to see you anymore. We told Mama and she said it's our choice. We choose not to." "No, please, you can't." Kenneth stepped forward. "That's enough, Jackson. The children have made their position clear." "Zara, Ethan, please." Jackson reached out, but both children stepped back. "My therapist says I have to set boundaries with people who hurt me," Zara said. And the adult language from a child's mouth was devastating. "My boundary is that I don't want you in my life anymore. Maybe when I'm older and I understand things better. But not now. Not yet. Probably not ever," Ethan added quietly. Kenneth ushered the children out, and Jackson collapsed into his chair, his sobs echoing in the empty visitation room. That evening Jackson sat in his apartment scrolling through social media. A form of self-torture he couldn't stop inflicting on himself. Michelle's company had just been featured in Business Day magazine. The article praised her innovative leadership and expansion into West African markets. There was a photo of her at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, looking powerful and elegant in a burgundy suit, smiling confidently. She had cut her hair into a beautiful short natural style. She looked free. The article mentioned she was one of Nigeria's most eligible businesswomen, though she had publicly stated she had no interest in remarrying. "My focus is on my children and my company," she had told the interviewer. "That's more than enough for any lifetime." Jackson zoomed in on the photo, looking for some trace of the pain he had caused her. But Michelle's face showed only strength, confidence, and peace. She had moved on. She was thriving. Without him. His phone buzzed. An email from his lawyer. Custody hearing rescheduled. Children's therapist report indicates continued preference for no contact with father. Court likely to grant children's wishes. Visitation rights may be suspended indefinitely pending children's psychological readiness. Jackson stared at the words until they blurred. The following week, Jackson mustered the courage to attend his old church for Sunday service. He arrived late, slipping into the back row, hoping to go unnoticed. But when the congregation stood for praise and worship, he saw her. Michelle sitting 3 rows from the front with Zara and Ethan. Her mother was there, her brother Kenneth, her cousins. An entire family rallied around her. Michelle was singing, her voice joining the chorus of praise. Zara leaned against her mother's side. Ethan held her hand. They looked like a complete family. Because they were. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Comment your thoughts on the betrayal, and tell me where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more gripping stories like this. What do you think happens next? Comment below.